If you want your characters to come to life, one of the most important things you need to know how to work is dialogue. Aside from the visuals, it's one of the main things where you actually get to know your character, and not just your viewers, but you yourself. People tend to struggle with it because they don't find it realistic enough or in character, and others feel like it's a requirement to make it deep or thought-provoking, like every word counts and it needs to build up to something, which you don't necessarily have to do. One advice I'd always like to give is that the importance of dialogue is to not usually treat it as a conversation, but more as a reaction. A way I could explain this is that as an artist, I'm known for making comics on Twitter, especially for mouthwashing and stuff like that, or Epic the Musical if you followed me on Tumblr. And a lot of the work I put into is centered around dialogue. But unlike others, I don't usually suggest that people should follow my method of working, but unlike others, 97% of the time, I don't even plan the dialogue. I don't write it down, I don't take quick notes, and it's more like I come up with random shower ideas or 12 a.m. thoughts of like, oh wow, I want to put these characters in that scenario. So usually I just end up drawing the characters into whatever position and whatever frame, and then the dialogue just comes with it. But one thing I learned over time while making my comics is that I usually treat dialogue as the catalyst. When it comes to making dialogue into a quote-unquote reaction, it involves a lot of what the character knows and what the viewers know. If the viewer comes to know something that the character doesn't, we call that dramatic irony. So that means that the character can't suddenly pull up information they've never heard of, even if it's formatted to be like a coincidence. An example of this is that person A is gonna be like, I want to get a haircut. When person A goes to person B and they say, I'm going to go out somewhere, it'll be off to hear person B suddenly say, oh, are you going to get a haircut? It's actually a lot more entertaining as a scenario if it was more formatted where person B doesn't know and is surprised when person A comes back looking new. Another issue that happens is that the author wants information to be shared to the viewer. So sometimes there are cases where they project onto the character, like they are possessing them, and start sharing information that would be common knowledge in that setting. This is most prominent for scenarios with like large world building, and even though it's hard, this is where the advice show don't tell comes in. Environmental storytelling is a lot more entertaining than forcing a viewer to listen or watch or read someone yap for too long. In cases like dialogue like this, dialogue can be formatted to lead the character on, to make them piece things together. As an example, person A wants to become a merchant in a high fantasy setting. They go to person B and says, I want to be a merchant. Instead of person B saying, no you can't, you have to blah blah blah, they'll instead point them into the direction of, oh, then you might want to go to insert area where they get their license or whatever. Not only does it save them from yapping, it also moves the story forward. As a different branch of this topic, when a person says something to another person, they are saying it in order to get a reaction. So when you get stuck on how or what the other person might say, then it's good to expand on your perspective, like what led them to this moment, what happened to them both separately, how are they feeling in that moment. With these kinds of questions, it avoids the stump of confusion when it comes to how they might respond. An example for this would be person A has good news to tell, and person B is having a rough day. When person A approaches them, their joy becomes overwhelming or relieving to person B, and they start crying because they can't hold it in. Of course, person A would panic and worry for them, and this could be how you format or visualize the dialogue for your scenarios. Moving on to another point, I'd like to go over avoidances that you don't actually need to avoid. One of the first things I'd always say is stuttering. It gets overwhelming to a point. You don't want to be like a YN or something to their CEO, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you dislike. I use it often as a way for the characters to fumble over their words. For me, it makes a clear line on who is actually more vocally articulate and who isn't, or to express their emotions of nervousness or anxiety. Sometimes it makes a character feel a lot more human in my perspective. Another thing is direct and short sentences. Kind of like in writing where there's like just a little chunk of one-line statements. There can always be cases where there doesn't have to be a large line or build-up. Sometimes short is good if the moment is curt or hurried. I've also seen it for comedic effects, like when someone's running to someone, they're heaving, and they say one-worded sentences to get a point across. Another thing is the dots. I probably overuse this one, but I don't find anything wrong with them. To me, they kind of act like a fade in and fade out transition when you use your editing softwares. It acts like a transition, like a soft one, to dialogue and like a curt pause to show that they're deep in thought before they speak. As a final point, I'd like to also go over personalities. There's always the case of mannerisms, but it requires extensive research and understanding on your part. It can be for Old English, Tarzan-like language, or Western. To a point, it can start feeling like tropes. If you're struggling to make a character act a certain way, make sure to figure out the side of them first. Consider their childhood, their education, setting, intelligence, and even generation. If you have completely intense world building, then maybe their country or language has certain unique sayings or slangs. For example, my story involves succubi in a modern setting, and sometimes the humans and succubi hunters that like to collect their teeth would say, "You can make a shark wear dentures," as a comment on how intimidating they are. All in all, that's really all I have to say, but once you get to know your character, or any character, then it starts feeling more habitual, like they're just like a part of you and it just comes to you automatically. So you guys can like subscribe if you want more advice like this. I think I know what I'm talking about. And follow me on Patreon and Twitter. I keep messing this up. Oh well. Yeah. Bye.